Welcome and thank you for joining today's conference, SPTO Model. Before we begin, please ensure you have opened the chat panel by using the associated icon located at the bottom of your screen. If you require technical assistance, please send a chat to the event producer. You can submit questions throughout the presentation to all panelists from the drop-down menu in the chat panel. Enter your question in the message box provided and send. All audio lines have been muted until the Q&A portion of the call. We will give you instruction on how to ask a question at that time. With that, I'll turn the call over to Deb Levine, Director of Infrastructure, Contracts, and Management. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm actually going to turn the call over to Caitlin McGee, who is our stakeholder affairs person in charge of the subscriber participating TO model status update. Caitlin?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the California ISO, I'd like to welcome you to the subscriber participating transmission owner model stakeholder meeting to discuss a few status updates. Again, my name is Caitlin McGee, representing the Stakeholder Affairs Group here at the ISO, and I'll be facilitating today's meeting. And so we're joined by Deb. As mentioned before, she's the Director of Infrastructure, Contracts, and Management. And just as a reminder, the presentation and agenda for this meeting can be found on the Meetings and Events page, which is under the Stay Informed tab on our website. So real quick, we'll go through some housekeeping reminders. This call is being recorded for informational and convenience purposes only, so any related transcriptions should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. This meeting is structured to stimulate dialogue, so please put questions into the chat or raise your hand. And we do ask that comments are kept professional and respectful. As mentioned before, to ask a question, you can raise your hand with the icon or use the chat window in WebEx. If you joined with audio only, you can press #2 on your phone. Please remember to state your name and affiliation before making your comment. And if you have any technical assistance questions during today's meeting, please feel free to send a chat to the event producer. So with that, I'll hand it over to Deb to walk us through the agenda.
All right, thanks very much, Caitlin. So the agenda for today is to give you an update and context of the Transwest Express and the ISO interactions to date, the planned sequence of events, and then discuss quite a bit about the subscriber participating transmission owner model that we've been working on with Transwest. So looking at the requirements for out-of-state wind for the future, what ends up happening is that the CPUC has gone ahead and come out with updated numbers for out-of-state wind. And what's being called the preferred system plan calls for 1,500 megawatts of wind, oh God, hold on, 1,500 megawatts of wind generation by 2023, and the high transportation electrification portfolio calls for over 4,000, almost 5,000 megawatts of out-of-state wind by 2035. If you look at the starting point scenario for the that the CEC and the CPUC have given the ISO, looking all the way out at 2040, what ends up happening is that we'll need, sorry, I have lots of things going on simultaneously. I apologize. We'll need over 10 gigawatt hours of out-of-state wind. Out-of-state wind counts both out of the state physically and out of the state environmentally. So it does, the 10,000 gigawatts will count the offshore wind, but at this point in time, the closer in numbers are looking at what wind we can get from Idaho, Wyoming, Arizona, and New Mexico. These projections have been defined by the CPC as just projections, and they're rough estimates of what they anticipate will be needed for the future. So the Transwest Express project. Transwest has already gone through a FERC-approved open season to sell capacity at negotiated rates on their transmission line from Wyoming to California. The line is fully sold in the north to south direction, and it's been sold to the Public Company of Wyoming. The Public Company of Wyoming is looking to get off-takers to execute power purchase agreements that would encompass energy, transmission, and congestions as a packaged product to get generation down into California. The transmission line itself includes both a DC portion and an AC portion to get all the way into California. It ends up being a DC line going from Wyoming into Utah, and then a AC line going from Utah all the way into California, with the opportunity to have exports both in Utah and in Nevada. So in Utah, it would export to the Intermountain Power Project, which is LADWP's balancing authority area. And in Nevada, it would offload into NV Energy's balancing authority area. So the ISO was approached by Transwest to join the ISO as a balancing authority area. This is of interest to us. We'd like to see less generation-only balancing authority areas from a reliability perspective, but it also goes ahead and allows a new kind of project to come in. So they've not been approved through our transmission planning process as a competitive solicitation project. They haven't met the criteria in order to go that direction, which is why Transwest went ahead and ran their FERC approved open season. And so what we're trying to build here is an option for stakeholders to have a subscriber PTO, is what we're calling it for obvious reasons, because Transwest has already gotten a subscriber in Public Company of Wyoming to subscribe for the transmission line to be built all the way from Wyoming to California. But then we need to develop rules in order to go ahead and acknowledge and ensure that what the off-takers have paid for will be retained if they join the CAISO Balancing Authority area. And we'll need to go ahead and make sure that whatever they do is consistent or agreed to by the parties in the ISO, and especially since we're looking to amend the transmission control agreement. So as far as the sequence of events is concerned, I will be going to the board next week asking the board to approve Transwest as a participating TO. The reason for this is it then allows us twofold. One is to go ahead and allow Transwest to be a participating TO in the transmission planning process and to act as a participating TO in order to go ahead and do the generator interconnection process for the generation that they're proposing to be put onto the line, which is the 3,000 megawatts of wind generation, which is being built by Public Company of Wyoming. They need to be a PTO in order for us to take on that generator interconnection process. So that's what's going on with that. Subsequent to the board hopefully approval and the filing of what we're calling an applicant participating transmission owner agreement, which is very, very similar to our approved project sponsor agreements. What it does is it goes ahead and it establishes that Transwest is going to go ahead and be a participating TO, meet the PTO requirements for all of the generator interconnection processes going forward. It's going to go, they'll go ahead and are required to keep the ISO up to date as to what's going on with their project as far as, you know, subscribers and are they going to be fully included in the CAISO Balancing Authority area. Are there any issues that are going on? It allows us to communicate back and forth. Unlike the approved project sponsor agreement, it does not give them any cost recovery for their transmission line. All of their cost recovery will be through the subscriber PTO and then the subscriber charge that we'll talk about in a little bit. And then the various notices and you know, standard agreement language, boilerplate language regarding, you know, defaults and assignments and stuff like that. So that's what's in the applicable applicant PTO agreement. Subsequent to that, so that should be all done, approved and filed in the January timeframe. Then the ISO is looking to work on the subscriber PTO model using a subscriber PTO protocol that will be added to the transmission control agreement and any administrative tariff changes that need to be made to the tariff. The administrative tariff changes would go before the board, filed at FERC, and then Transwest, once they get close to energization, would need to develop the subscriber charge that we'll talk about in a little bit. At the moment, Transwest is looking to go ahead and energize in 2027. So we do have a few years to go. But the reason for doing all of this now is twofold. One is by allowing them to be a PTO now and putting their generation into Cluster 15, then Public Company of Wyoming knows what the costs are going to be for if there's any network upgrade costs required for either reliability or deliverability. They'll know what those costs are. They have agreed to pay for those without reimbursement by the participating TOs, which is a little bit different. But then again, that's, you know, an opportunity for the subscriber PTO model. Typically, the generator interconnection is reimbursed by the interconnecting participating TO. In this case, as the subscriber PTO, they've agreed to pay for all the network upgrades that are needed on the ISO grid to reliably deliver the generation into California to the extent that there are subscribers in California. And the other piece is that we need to get the subscriber PTO protocol done as soon as possible, because that then gives them comfort as to what the rules are going to be that they'll need to play by and what cost recovery they can get out of the market to the extent that the line is not being used by the subscribers. So the execution of the transmission control agreement and the TO tariff will be filed much closer to when the line energizes in 2027, but they need all of this other structure in place in advance of that in order to make sure that they know what the rules are, their off-takers know what they're going to end up having to pay for the generation when it's coming in, and what rules they're going to be allowed to play by underneath the ISO's market structure. So that's an overview of the sequence of events. Does anybody have any questions at this point regarding the sequence of events before we get into the actual model itself?
If you would like to ask a question, please press the raise hand icon on your screen to enter the question queue. That raise hand icon is located just above the chat panel on WebEx. If you are called into our phone-only line, please dial #2 to indicate that you wish to ask a question. Once again, on WebEx, that's the raise hand icon above the chat panel, and on the phone only line, #2. There seem to be no questions in the queue at this time.
Fabulous, thank you. All right, so here's a little bit better picture of the Transwest Express project. So the project will, in essence, extend the CAISO boundary all the way up to just outside of the Ferris substation, which will be built in Pacific Corp area in Wyoming. The boundary will be, I don't know whether it's going to be one tower outside, halfway in between Ferris and the Wyoming substation, but in essence, the boundary for CAISO will be all the way up to that point. And then the 3,000 megawatts of wind generation will be connected here at Wyoming substation. And from Wyoming all the way down to Utah is a 400 plus mile high voltage DC line, which will go ahead and run from Wyoming down to Utah. In Utah, it'll be converted to AC, and there's the opportunity to move 1,500 megawatts off onto LADWP's existing infrastructure that they've got up in Utah. And then the Transwest project goes further down into the Nevada area, moving to the small square. And it will connect at a substation is going to be called TWE Crystal. And at TWE Crystal, they'll be able to go ahead and connect to the existing Crystal substation, which in essence is in the NV Energy's Balancing Authority area. And then Transwest will bring another line down, which will loop into the existing Harry Allen El Dorado line. And there's also the potential to have a line that goes directly from the new substation to the Harry Allen line. Mainly because the Harry Allen line is limited to 2,700 megawatts at the moment. There's already transactions coming in on the Harry Allen line, and there's a potential of up to 1,500 megawatts coming south from Utah all the way into the Nevada, California area. So that will go ahead and introduce some additional boundaries for the ISO. And the boundaries will, in essence, be with NV Energy, SRP, APS, and LADWP. So for the subscriber model, we have a number of considerations. What we're trying to do is establish it as predominantly a transmission that's used to meet state or utility clean energy policy initiatives. We're also looking for the line to be in at least one direction fully subscribed. So it's already paid for by the subscribers, so it won't be part of the transmission access charge. But because it's not part of the transmission access charge, we are willing to go ahead and give the subscribers, in essence, encumbrances or existing contract rights on the transmission line. So in other words, an encumbrance is where, to the extent you have a encumbrance on the line, you're given the perfect hedge, which means you don't pay for transmission or congestion because you've already purchased that through the agreement with Public Company of Wyoming, who's got the wind. And they've also already paid for the energy, but that's a different thing. It's not part of the transmission, which is what the ISO does. And it also gives them a superior right for scheduling on the transmission line because they've paid for the transmission line. And that's what an encumbrance and that type of an existing contract will do. They're also going to have their own TAC area. And the reason behind having their own TAC area is kind of twofold. what ends up happening is that while the transmission access charge in California has all been blended into one rate, there are a number of settlement charges, additional settlement charges that are charged just on TAC areas. One of them happens to be unaccounted for energy as an example. And so unaccounted for energy is where in essence, large, like PG&E, Edison, San Diego is how they're split at the moment. DEA has their own TAC area. Metropolitan Water District has their own TAC area. So it's in essence a large area that goes ahead and takes care of some of the charges that are peanut buttered by the ISO. Unaccounted for energy is one of them, so that the costs aren't spread across the entire state and they're spread regionally instead of across the entire state. As I already said, the subscriber PTO would fund the transmission revenue requirement. It would not be part of our TAC. And it would be paid by, in essence, the off-takers of their wind/transmission project, combined project. We are looking at allowing them to recover an incremental charge for the use of the transmission. And the reason for that is because you can't use transmission for free. Even in, you know, an open access tariff, you can't use transmission for free. So since they're not being, their costs are not being included in the transmission access charge, while yes, the subscribers are paying for the transmission to be built, to the extent that they could defray some of those costs because there are other non-subscribers that are using it, we think that's fair and that's how it should be done. And as I said earlier, what we're looking to do is add a protocol to the transmission control agreement. I see Chris Devon has his hand raised. Operator, could you please open Chris's line?
Hey, Deb. This is Chris with Customized Energy Solutions. Can you hear me all right?
I can.
All right. Well, first off, thank you to the CAISO and yourself for doing all this work to explain this new complicated concept to everybody and taking the time before the board meeting to go over it with everyone. I really appreciate the extra information. I think others probably do as well. But the question on this point specifically was related to this additional subscriber PTO charge for the non-subscriber use. And I was just curious if in the kind of discussions with TWE, are you able to tell us if they're thinking of doing some kind of an annual true-up mechanism where they would basically, you know, credit the non-subscriber use against the TRR that's going to be collected, or some other approach, or is it just some other incremental revenue that they would collect?
They have market-based rate authority already from FERC for the transmission line and the generation, the package. So I don't know how they would go ahead and true it up. The discussions we have had with them is that whatever the subscriber charge ends up being, they would have to go through a FERC process and get approval on that subscriber charge, similar to the way our participating TOs get FERC approval on their transmission revenue requirement, so that we can calculate the transmission access charge and the wheeling access charge. For them, they would just supply us with $1 per megawatt hour value that's been approved by FERC for the subscriber charge.
Okay, I think I understand. I guess my only concern with this is just that if there's not some kind of true-up mechanism, that there would be some potential over-recovery or double recovery of those costs, possibly, if the subscribers are already paying for the full cost of the line. So that was kind of why I just was curious about this part of it, which I think is somewhat of a new concept in the overall discussion. So I guess perhaps this will probably be clearer when they do their rate structure. So that would be like a public process. Do you think they'll have any kind of a discussion with stakeholders in advance of that, or would they just be kind of following, and it'd be a FERC proceeding? Do you have any sense of that? at this point? I know it's maybe far out into the future.
Yeah, it's far out into the future. I don't know for sure. I can tell you that most of the participating TOs today have what they call formula rates, and they do a stakeholder process in advance of filing with FERC. I don't know what Transwest is going to do, though.
Okay, yeah, and the existing PTOs all have that kind of a true-up mechanism in those formula rates if they over-recover, under-recover. So anyways, yeah, that's fine. If it's stated rate, you know, then there may be some over-recovery or something. But anyways, I was just curious a little bit more about that piece. So thanks for that, and I'll wait for the rest of the presentation for anything else. Thank you.
Okay, great. Yeah, the intent is to not, quote unquote, over-recover or double recover. The intent is to go ahead and defray some of the costs from the subscribers that have paid for the whole line. But since it's just wind generation up there, it's not going to be used 24/7, 365. And there will be the ability for the ISO market structure to use the line to the extent that the subscriber doesn't go ahead and self-schedule in using their contract reference numbers, the generation that they purchased from the wind generation. All right, I don't see any other hands raised. Are there any, let me see, I didn't look. Doesn't look like there is a question in the chat?
There are not.
Okay, thank you. I was going to say, I didn't think that, I just looked, I didn't think there was one. All right, I'll keep going. All right. So the rationale for the treating of subscriber rights, I've already talked quite a bit to this, but in essence, you know, existing contracts is a concept the ISO has had since inception, prior to inception, actually, and giving the rights holders the perfect hedge, which takes care of the transmission and the congestion, and then the scheduling priority because they've already paid for it. It also allows us to use existing software and tariff functionality and give them the contract reference numbers that they already have. So one of the things that we have agreed with them on is that this ability to have the encumbrance and the existing contract rights only counts for the original subscriber. So the original generation is 3,000 megawatts. It would only count for that original 3,000 megawatts. If they were to add public company of, if they were to add additional generation onto the line, then that additional generation would not get the subscriber rights usage, so they wouldn't be able to have encumbrances. So this is a finite, the first time they sign up, that's all that's going to get the subscriber rights. So it's not something that's going to happen into perpetuity. It's what's in the original project are the only entities that are going to end up with the subscriber rights for that generation. It's not going to be extended beyond to a new transmission line that's coming in, or to, you know, let's say somebody wants to hook in at Utah or hook in at Crystal. It would not be given, the subscriber rights would not be given to those entities either. The subscribers will need to schedule using their contract reference numbers in the day-ahead market or real-time market, which is the half time, which is 75 minutes before, to the extent that it's not encumbered in the day-ahead market. The day-ahead market will have the ability to go ahead and optimize the balance of the transmission line. And in the real time, if they subscriber does go ahead and use their contract reference numbers and encumbrance in the real-time market, similar to what we do today for the over 40 plus encumbrances that we have in the system. It ends up that we rebalance the system to make sure that the load is served by the generation. And then it goes ahead and will allow them to have their perfect hedge and priority rights on transmission, but the balance of it will be available for new firm use on the market. So in the Western EIM, transfers in real time are between the Western EIM BAAs are still going to be treated the same. What happens is the subscriber right starts in Wyoming, which is not part of the transfer because the transfer with Pacific Corp is up at Ferris. So it's not going to impact that. So the reciprocity rule that exists in WEAM that allows free flow between balancing authority areas, PACAs is a Western EIM balancing authority area, CAISO is. So the reciprocity rule in real time for those transfers will be held in place. That won't be an issue. One of the other questions that we've been asked is why aren't we just giving them CRR rights as a substitute for the subscribers? And what we found is that CRR rights have never been successful in compensating transmission line owners for building a transmission line. And specifically, since this generation is trying to meet the renewable requirements of California, we believe that the encumbrance is a better way to do it. And we've also, set it up so that it's this finite set of transmission that's going to be encumbered. It's not that they can add new transmission in the future that'll be encumbered. So as an example, if they were to get someone who wants to have subscriber rights from, let's say, Transwest Crystal up to Ferris, that would not be allowed. We would not give them the encumbrance rights for that. They'd have to go ahead and compete. Actually, they can only go as far as Utah because the DC line only goes one direction. Keep forgetting that. So since the DC line only goes one direction, if they were to go ahead and try to put subscriber rights from Crystal or from the new substation up to the Utah substation or something like that, that would not be allowed. It's just for this first time introduction of the line to the subscriber. Chris, do you have another question?
Yes, Chris from CS again. Just on the CRR issue, I just wanted to clarify. You're saying that CAISO is not going to provide CRRs for the subscribers. Is there going to be any type of CRR nominations or allocations on any of the parts of the line, though? If other LSCs wanted to try to get it, let's say they were non-subscriber and they were worried about some of the potential congestion costs that might be driven by the subscribers' use or lack thereof on the line at times when they're scheduling the line and then other things happening between day ahead and real time, those sort of things, sorry, day ahead market, I should say.
Yeah.
Is there, go ahead.
Okay. So CRRs will be available on the line, both north to south and south to north. But as far as giving subscribers just CRRs, we've determined that that's not sufficient, which is why we're giving them the encumbrance.
Okay, got it. So it's just going to be like another part of this whole network model that you guys go and do the normal CRR allocation process on, and and other LSCs could nominate that if they wanted to. Okay. Okay. Thank you so much.
Sure. David, do you have a question?
Also, yeah, go ahead from David.
Oh, this is Dave Smith from Transwest Express. Deb, I just wanted to highlight that the DC line is bidirectional. So can be flows from Utah into Wyoming, as well as Wyoming to Utah. I think they'll be treated differently as far as the subscriber rights go.
Correct, but it can only go one direction at a time. Correct?
We can accept schedules in both directions.
Simultaneously?
Sure.
Okay. Learning something new. All right, thanks, David. Appreciate that. Okay, as far as the project transmission costs, as we've discussed, the project cost will not be included in the transmission access charge or the wheeling access charge. Transwest will be developing a $1 per megawatt hour subscriber charge, which will be used to charge non-subscriber use of the project. To the extent that it's being used if they're making purchases in the day-ahead or real-time market. The entire project will be modeled in the full network model. So we'll have the full output of the line in the model itself. Some people had raised concern that they thought that we were only going to model what was not subscribed. And actually, the way that we do the modeling is that we go ahead and we model the full line and then limit it based on whatever the subscriber bids in the day-ahead or real-time market is where the limitation comes in. It's not as if we only model part of a line, like an entitlement type thing that we have in another balancing authority area. So if the subscribers do not schedule on the project, it will be available for market use. And then as we talked a little bit earlier, the subscriber charge, Transwest will have to get FERC approval of that. They'll go through a whole process, and that rate process will be consistent with what's in the ISO tariff today for all the other PTOs. So a number of you have already seen this slide, some of you more than once, but it took me so long to put it together, I have to put it in the presentation. So what ends up happening is that the subscriber, in essence, is the teal color. So they can go from Wyoming to Utah. Whatever goes out onto LADWP system will go out at Utah, then goes down to TWE Crystal, and whatever goes out at Crystal in NBE's territory or at Harry Allen in NBE's territory, that's going to be allowed. And then there'll be the loop in of the new substation in the existing Harry Allen El Dorado line. And then as far as new firm use is concerned, new firm use can go, as David said, either direction. I did have it right. Either direction from Ferris all the way to New, or from New all the way to Ferris simultaneously. So it does net out. And in essence, there'll be LNPs at Wyoming, Utah, TWE Crystal, and New because they're boundary points. Sorry, Wyoming is because it's generation, but Ferris, Utah, and TWE Crystal will have LNPs because they're scheduling boundary points, so that we'll be able to know exactly what goes in and out where. So as far as what are the subscribers going to pay versus what are the non-subscribers going to pay? The subscribers have already paid, as part of the power purchase agreement, the cost of the transmission, the energy, and the congestion. So they will not incur that cost twice, obviously. They'll have to pay the transmission access charge if they're in the CAISO BA. They'll need to pay the TAC to sync it to the load in the CAISO BA, or the WAC if they're going through the CAISO Balancing Authority area, let's say to get to Palo Verde as an example. Or if they're going through the CAISO Balancing Authority area to get up to the Pacific Northwest. It'd be easier to go out at Ferris, but they would need to go ahead and do that to export to an export point that is not on the project. They get the perfect hedge, which we've talked about a number of times, and some of the costs, as I said, that are TAC area costs that would be allocated just to them have to do with some of the other charges are big cost recovery allocation, offset, and the IFM congestion allocation, and unaccounted for energy. The non-subscribers will pay the transmission access charge and the subscriber charge to the extent that the generation is synced to load in the ISO Balancing Authority area, or if you're going the opposite direction, you pay the WAC charge if you want to go ahead and sell to Pacific Corp East at Ferris. You would pay the WAC export charge along with the subscriber charge to go ahead and sync it to an export point that is outside of the CAISO BA. And non-subscribers pay all other applicable market charges. And I just saw a question come in on the chat from Doug Boccioni. How will losses be addressed and charged? So losses are going to be paid for in accordance with the ISO tariff. So similar to existing contracts today, the losses are calculated based on, well, the DC losses are calculated based on the DC losses. AC losses are based on the modeling. The losses all are going to be charged whether you're a subscriber or non-subscriber, consistent with the ISO tariff. And if that doesn't answer, oh, thank you. Okay. I was going to say, Doug, if that doesn't answer your question, just go ahead and raise your hand. So, and at the moment, as far as the Western EIM is concerned, net transfer capability with other Western EIM Balancing Authority areas will not be charged the transmission cost because there's a reciprocity agreement. If there's a net import coming in on the Transwest Express line, then the subscriber charge will be allocated to the ISO load. At the moment, in the day ahead, it'll be based on the allocation that we've already discussed because the reciprocity doesn't impact the Western EIM. In EDAM, what ends up happening is that there's under consideration is what's called a transmission revenue recovery mechanism. And so the transmission revenue recovery mechanism is supposed to handle any new transmission lines that result in wheeling opportunities and transfers between balancing authority areas that are both EDAM balancing authority areas. And there's also a component in that recovery mechanism that takes care of wheel-through transactions, net transactions that would come into the CAISO and go out of the CAISO is going to be part of this recovery mechanism. And those charges are actually charged to the other EDAM BAAs. There'll also be a calculation that is done to see how much of the generation came and actually sunk to the ISO load from the Wyoming wind generation. And then those entities who serve that load will be charged the subscriber charge along with the TAC charge. So that's what it looks like at the moment in the EDAM world, assuming that EDAM is going to come online prior to 2027 when this line is expected to be energized. Let me see, I think I go on to a new subject. So, yes, so does anybody have any questions at this point? Steve? Operator, if you can, thank you.
Yeah, this is Steve Shoemaker with the Public Advocate's Office. Thank you so much for the presentation. I apologize if you pointed this out. I kind of broke up there, but under EDAM, which a lot of the studies assume kind of 100% transmission availability. So can you speak to it all, like whether the encumbrances would remain in their current form under that structure? If it's kind of predicated, the benefits are predicated on that availability. Does that make sense?
It does and it doesn't, because the EDAM isn't predicated on 100% transmission availability. EDAM is predicated on the existing contract concepts that we have in California, where it's a kind of use it or lose it type of use of transmission. So all the EDAM BAAs, all of their existing contracts will be given contract reference numbers, just like what we have in California. And so if their existing contract holders don't go ahead and schedule that transmission, then it's available for the EDAM to use. Same thing if the contract allows them to schedule closer to real time, then they'll have to schedule using their contract reference numbers in the hour-ahead or real-time market in order to retain the flow of the generation, get the perfect hedge, the scheduling priority, and no congestion.
Okay.
So does that help?
Yeah, I think so. And I think I misspoke a little bit. I didn't say the market itself was predicated on that, but a lot of the benefits models that I've seen assume that. So I think I'm going to need to dig into that a little bit. But I think what you said is helpful, and we'll consider that in kind of reviewing this.
Okay. Yeah, it's anticipated in EDAM. We're going to use our existing contract mechanism for the existing contracts that the other EDAM BAAs have. Obviously, you know, all of the other EDAM BAAs are not a market like the ISO is. They're all based on OAT contracts or legacy contracts that they've had for years. And so all of that will need to be converted to the contract reference numbers and the existing contract paradigm that we have for California in the EDAM markets.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Sure. Susan.
Yeah. Hi, Deb. Susan Schneider, Phoenix Consulting. I had a question on slide number 15 about what the subscribers will pay. And I understand that obviously the subscribers have already paid for their transmission and energy and all that. But I guess I'm a little puzzled about why they would have to also pay the TAC, because generators generally don't, on the CAISO system, don't pay the TAC because that amount is in the end user rates. And so it seems like if they're serving load on the CAISO system using the transmission that the load has paid for, I'm not sure I understand why the subscribers would have to pay the TAC.
So the subscriber is the city of Anaheim, as an example. So the subscriber is the load.
Oh, okay. So the subscriber, okay, but I thought the Public Company of Wyoming was the subscriber on the new project on Transwest.
Okay. So let me back up a second. So at the moment, the subscriber is the Public Company of Wyoming.
Right.
But they're in essence the generator. So they're going to have power purchase agreements with all of their off-takers. So the subscriber rights will flow with the power purchase agreements to the load serving entities, because they're in essence the ones that are going to use the
Oh,
generation
okay.
load.
Okay, so the subscriber is not the Public Company of Wyoming. The subscriber is the actual load serving entity that will take the energy. And they are already paying for the TAC, presumably in their end user rate. So this is not a separate charge. It's just what they are already paying for.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful, a helpful clarification. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I've got to come up with a better way to, because at the moment, Public Company of Wyoming would be holding all of the subscriber rights and obligations. But then what's going to happen is they're going to pass that down through their power purchase agreements to whoever their off-takers are.
Right. Well, maybe just call that the off-taker then. And then it wouldn't be confused with the original subscriber versus the one that they pass the rights to. So if the off-taker gets the rights with the PPA, then just call it the off-taker maybe, and then everyone would understand that was the off-taker and probably the LSE and all of that. So thank you. But I do appreciate that clarification because I was just a little confused.
No problem.
That's all I've got.
Okay, thanks so much. Chris?
Hey again, Deb. Sorry, that last discussion just raised a question for me because of the one point, I think, when you were talking with Susan about how she said it was not going to be an additional charge. And so I guess that doesn't make sense to me because they're saying here that they do pay the tax charge on generation that's synced into load into the CAISO PA. So my understanding is that would be in addition to whatever their PPA with the subscriber Public Company of Wyoming would be. Is that correct or not?
So you got to remember that the subscriber company of Wyoming only gets them to the new substation. That's all they're paying
that's what
for.
I thought. So that means that this additional charge is to get the tax from the new substation to deliver to load in the CAISO PA. And so the CAISO PA load, those subscribers essentially are paying the tax charge to get from there. So it is an additional charge beyond just their subscriber costs. Okay, that's what I wanted to clarify. Thank you very much.
Yep, you got it. Okay. And nothing in the chat. All right, so let me go on to generator interconnection. So as I said at the beginning, part of the reason why we're going to the board in December is to allow Public Company Wyoming to get into Cluster 15. And just to lay out for those of you that aren't generation developers, you probably don't have these types of schedules memorized. For those of us who play in this realm, it's like, embellished on our brains as to what these dates are. But in order for them to know what their upgrade requirements are and to know if they have deliverability, if you get into the queue in April of 2023, you're not going to know that until March of 2025. And they're trying to come online in 2027. So that's why they need to get on into the queue as soon as possible. And in order for the generation to be studied, you need to have the PTO, which is Transwest Express, in as a PTO so that they can do the reliability studies associated with interconnecting the generation and work with the downstream PTOs, predominantly Edison and LS Power, that are going to be impacted by this additional potentially 1,500 megawatts that's going to come all the way to California. And so that's the reason why this needed to be done as soon as possible. And the delivery network upgrades are going to be contingent upon what's needed in the BA. And I would note that the CPUC has gone ahead and this year directed the ISO in our transmission planning process for 2023-24 to increase the transfer capability coming out of El Dorado already because of the anticipation of the out-of-state wind. So there'll be some of the upgrades you'll see in the transmission planning process and some of the upgrades potentially in the generator interconnection process once they get through that. There have been a number of questions regarding deliverability and what happens to the MIC. What will happen to the MIC is the market import, sorry, I always say that wrong. The maximum import capability at all of the existing import points are not likely to change at all. What happens is that that capability is distributed among all the load serving entities. So with Transwest Express coming in, we just have 3 new import points. And so in talking to the regional planning group, what will happen is now all of the load serving entities will have additional market import capability at Ferris, at Utah, and at Transwest Crystal. So that'll be in addition to the import capability that already exists for the load serving entities. Since the generation that we're talking about, Public Company of Wyoming Generation, is within the balancing authority area, they don't use any market maximum import capability to get the generation home. Allocation to generation as far as getting it delivered is part of the generator interconnection process. So Chris, any questions on that? Since you were the one who asked me at the symposium and I had to go research it.
Well, yeah, I do, Deb, actually. Thanks for asking. Again, Chris with CES here. So my kind of question here is somewhat related to the existing import points and then adding these new ones. So my understanding of what kind of Catalin and the regional planning group does is they take the full amount of all the schedules coming into the CAISO at the top hours of the year during the highest load hours, essentially. And there's some flexibility to pick the highest ones to try to maximize it. And then they take that amount and they get usually somewhere around 15,000 megawatts. Then they take off all the EPC QRs, pre-RA commitments, and then it ends up somewhere around 10 gigawatts or so. That's then split amongst all these points. So for adding 3 new import points, then is CAISO going to increase the amount of those schedules that it looks at in the overall MIC amount to try to ensure that this doesn't somehow reduce all the other ones? Because if you're adding 3 points, I think there's like 40, 50 intertie points. Yeah. So it's probably not a huge, change here. I do acknowledge that. I don't think it's going to be something drastic that's going to reduce it by a huge material amount. But I'm just curious as to, if there's going to be any additional process or change to maybe how they model that to add, like, if there's 1,500 new megawatts or whatever the amount for each of these 3 new intertie points is, can they do something there to kind of ensure that overall MIC amount on those other areas isn't going to be reduced by any significant value, I guess, is really what I'm trying to get at, because of the, adding these extra points and then still allocating out essentially the same amount from what we had seen previously should reduce it by a little bit, I think.
Actually,
so that's a lot. Sorry.
That's okay. I gotcha. In talking to Catalin, what he said in essence is it's not going to change the existing points. It'll add additional import capability, and then you could think of it as now the load serving entities get 3 more points, and that additional import capability as far as MIC is concerned.
Okay, so that's kind of what I was thinking, where it would just add an increased amount to the total that then gets divvied out. Okay. I'll wait until that next process and probably ask Catalin some more questions about exactly what numbers are going to be used and how that's going to impact things. But I think this gives me a lot more comfort than where I was prior to this. So thank you for doing a little bit more research and talking with them on this. It's helpful, and it's important to try to bring in RA and making sure that these new subscriber PTO model, projects don't impact the ability of those other import RA resources to still be qualified and get the MIC and that sort of thing. So, anyway,
Right.
thank you very much.
Okay. So some of the general comments that we've gotten are that the subscriber PTO, the Transwest Express project should go through the competitive solicitation process, and the ISO should determine what the least cost, best fit projects are for load serving entities. And this project has not met the criteria to go through the transmission planning process. Plus, the ISO would like to give load serving entities the opportunity to make their own decisions regarding which of the various out-of-state wind generators they want to go ahead and contract with. So we're not going to be putting Transwest Express into the competitive solicitation process. And it will be up to the off-takers to determine whether the project actually moves forward or not. If obviously they can't get subscribers to pay for the line to be built to begin with, then the line won't move forward. But we're hoping that with this opportunity, and as I rolled out, we're trying to get comfort early on in 2023 as to how all the pieces would work, then it can be helpful, hopefully, for the load serving entities in California that do need to start looking at out-of-state wind as far as purchases are concerned. So I think this is my last slide. Oh no, I know there's one more. So the benefits of, kind of stepping back and why is the ISO doing this? So Mike, I guess we'll take Mike's question before we step back. Mike?
Yes, can you hear me okay, Deb?
Yeah, I can, Mike.
Okay. I'm going back to that MIC issue. And what I'm trying to get my head around is there's a certain amount of MIC now, and you'll be adding new points that could potentially deliver, but unless and until there's an expansion downstream of El Dorado within the existing ISO footprint, wouldn't any deliveries from Transwest just be displacing other imports?
Well, a couple of things. One is that, as I said earlier, the PUC portfolio is requiring us to expand downstream of El Dorado. Plus, what ends up is that when Public Company of Wyoming goes through the generator interconnection process, to the extent that they can't deliver it to the CAISO load, there will be upgrades required for them to have deliverability, because getting it to El Dorado won't give them deliverability to the load. But to tell you the truth, I think that the upgrades probably in the TPP process are going to more than cover the 1,500 megawatts that might be coming into California underneath the Transwest Express model.
Okay. Thank you. That clears it up. Appreciate it.
Sure. Okay, so stepping back, the benefits of the subscriber PTO model is, in essence, it's giving market participants an opportunity to acquire out-of-state wind generation without increasing the transmission access charge. So, and it also gives the load serving entities to make their own determination. There's various projects out there, there's Idaho wind, there's Wyoming wind, there's New Mexico wind, there's some Arizona, Western Arizona wind, there's some Colorado wind. There'll be offshore wind. So there'll be all sorts of opportunities for entities to get out-of-state wind, which is, now one of the requirements as far as CPUC jurisdictional entities are concerned. But it's also going to be needed in order to meet the renewable portfolio standards for California. So this model would allow the load serving entities to make the decision, determine the demands, determine what their need is. It gives them access and it gives them a structure as to how the charges would be allocated within California. It'll provide incremental capacity for what we believe is a reasonable rate. And it's an overall kind of win-win situation. It's not a project that is going to, add $5 onto the transmission access charge. It's something that's going to add, potentially, if you're a subscriber, you'll pay the transmission access charge that you're already paying, but you'll be able to go ahead and get the wind all the way in. If you're a non-subscriber, then yes, you have to pay this additional transmission cost because it's not included in the tax, but you'll have to, you'll have an opportunity to have access to now a direct line part of the CAISO BA all the way up into Pacific Northeast, LADWP, and into other access into Nevada than what we have now. And it also goes ahead and provides, honors the open access tariff issues and honors the subscribers' agreements to create choice for consumers. So we think it's overall a good opportunity that doesn't cost us anything until the entities that want to make that financial decision make that financial decision. And then my last slide is next steps. What we'd like to do is have you go ahead and submit comments into the commenting tool. The link is provided in the presentation. And if you could get the comments, I'm trying to get them in before everybody goes on the holidays vacation. So in by December 19th, that would be great. We do have a web page for the subscriber PTO model. And if you have any questions, you can go ahead and contact ISO Stakeholder Affairs at CAISO.com. So with that, does anyone have any other questions before I turn it over to Caitlin to see if she has any wrap-up items? Yes, Mike? Oh, Mike was there and then I lost Mike.
You can read his question also in the chat from Mike. It says, is CAISO aware of any opposition to this new model? Not the details, but the concept.
As far as the concept is concerned, we're not aware of any opposition to the new model, but the devil's always in the details. But we have been working out a number of the details and people seem to be getting more and more comfortable with it. I hope. At least that's what I'm hearing. And hopefully I don't have earmuffs on. So Caitlin, I'll turn it back to you. Thanks so much.
All right, thank you. And again, comments are due by the end of day, December 19th, and those can be sent to initiativecomments@CAISO.com. So with that, we'll conclude the meeting. Thank you everyone for joining today.
That concludes today's conference. Thank you for using Event Services. You may now disconnect.